Ever notice how ads always pop up at the worst moments? When the killer's identity is about to be revealed. During that perfect meditation flow. On Amazon Music, we believe in keeping you in the moment. That's why we've got millions of ad-free podcast episodes, so you can stay completely immersed in every story, every reveal, every breath. Download the Amazon Music app and start listening to your favorite podcasts ad-free, included with Prime.
E-commerce business owners know a successful business keeps customers happy. That's why smart retailers use ShipStation. Turn shoppers into loyal customers with cheaper, faster, and better shipping. Manage all your orders and returns in one place and save up to 90% on rates from all the global carriers. Go to shipstation.com/program to sign up for your free trial. No credit card required, and you can cancel anytime. That's shipstation.com/program.
Hi everyone, I am your host, Peter Zablocki, and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far, and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review, and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on a show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the Conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can listen to exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. You could always shoot me an email at peter@historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, before the gunshots at Lexington and Concord echoed across the colonies, before the Boston Tea Party plunged crates into the harbor, another act of rebellion struck fear into the British crown, and it happened not in Massachusetts, but in the quiet waters off Rhode Island. There in the murky shallows of Narragansett Bay, a British customs ship called the HMS Gaspee ran aground, and into history. What happened next was not simply an act of smuggling resistance or vandalism. It was arson, sedition, and open defiance of royal authority. In the darkness of June 10, 1772, a band of colonial patriots boarded the Gaspee, shot her captain, and dragged the crew ashore, and then burned the ship to the waterline. The flames that danced on the bay that night were not just from tar and pitch. They were actually the first sparks of a revolution. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Unlike its larger neighbors, the Rhode Island colony was small but fiercely independent, a haven for merchants, dissenters, and smugglers. The people of Providence, Newport, and Warwick were not just weary of British taxation, they actively evaded it. Trade was their lifeblood, and imperial customs officials, those charged with collecting duties on molasses, sugar, rum, and tea, were seen as enemies, not protectors. By the 1760s, after Britain's crushing debts from the 7 Years' War, Parliament had ramped up enforcement of customs regulations through acts like the Sugar Act and the Townshend Acts. Ships like the Gaspee were deployed to patrol colonial waters, seize contraband, and bring order to what London saw as a lawless coast. But to the colonists, ships like the Gaspee were symbols of tyranny, floating reminders that the crown cared more about the taxes than liberty. The Gaspee, under the command of Lieutenant William Duddingston, was particularly despised. Aggressive, arrogant, and apologetic, Duddingston patrolled the bay with ruthless zeal. He stopped ships without warrants, detained local vessels for the slightest infractions, and harassed merchants large and small. In one instance, he seized a cargo of rum from a prominent local businessman, refusing to offer restitution. In another, he boarded vessels flying Rhode Island colors and tore down their flags. His presence felt less like law enforcement and more like occupation. By early 1776, tensions were boiling. The colonial governor, Joseph Wanton, received letters of protests about Duddingston's overreach. Merchants demanded his recall. When Wanton politely asked to see Duddingston's commission and authority, the lieutenant arrogantly refused. He answered not to the governor, he said, but to the admiral in London. This only fanned the flames. Rhode Island's colonial legislature passed resolutions condemning his actions, but still, the Gaspee prowled the bay like a shark, seizing cargo and humiliating sailors. But then everything changed on June 9, 1772. That afternoon, a local vessel called the Hannah, captained by Benjamin Lindsay, sailed from Newport up Narragansett Bay. As usual, the Gaspee gave chase, suspecting contraband. Lindsay, knowing the channel and tides well, hugged the western shore near Warwick. Duddingston followed in hot pursuit and made a critical error. Around dusk, the Gaspee struck a sandbar. The tide was low, and she couldn't be freed until morning. Lindsay sailed on, but the news of the Gaspee's predicament traveled fast. Faster than the tide, you might say. By nightfall, a group of prominent Providence citizens had gathered in a tavern just a few blocks from docks. Among them was John Brown, a wealthy merchant and known smuggler, not the John Brown of the Civil War era, of course, and Abraham Whipple, a former privateer with a taste for confrontation. Over mugs of rum, they made a decision that would echo into history. If the British Navy was going to threaten their livelihoods, then the colonists would answer, not in court, but in fire. Whipple and Brown gathered a band of about 60 men, shopkeepers, sailors, blacksmiths, and tradesmen. They armed themselves with muskets, sabers, and clubs. They disguised their identities. Around 2 a.m., under the cover of darkness, they rowed quietly from Providence in longboats toward the stranded Gaspee. The night was moonless, they say, and the water was still. What happened next was as daring as it was illegal. The colonists approached silently. A lookout on the Gaspee shouted a challenge. Whipple, or one of the raiders, reportedly answered, "I am the sheriff of Kent County. I have a warrant." Before the crew could react, the attackers swarmed the boat. A short skirmish followed. Shots rang out. Lieutenant Duddingston was shot in the groin and collapsed, bleeding on the deck. The crew surrendered right away. The patriots took them ashore, bound and bruised. Then they returned to the ship. They set it alight. Pitch and tar caught fast. Flames engulfed the rigging, up the masts, and split the night sky with red light. Gunpowder aboard the Gaspee exploded in a thunderclap heard for miles. By dawn, all that remained was charred timber floating in the tide. The mighty Gaspee, scourge of smugglers, was gone, reduced to ashes by ordinary men. The Crown was not happy. In London, the incident was seen as a direct affront to royal authority, not just defiance, but rebellion. An official inquiry was launched. A royal commission was established, empowered to identify and arrest the culprits and send them to England for trial, a violation of colonial legal rights that many colonists viewed as tyranny itself. Governor Wanton, caught between loyalty to the crown and sympathy with the constituents, dragged his feet. Witnesses forgot details. Sailors went missing. No one could identify the attackers, or perhaps no one dared. Despite substantial reward offered by the Crown, not a single perpetrator was convicted. The British authorities knew many of the ringleaders. Everyone in Rhode Island did, but they could prove nothing. John Brown, the merchant turned arsonist, even dared to walk the streets openly. The colonial population treated the event not as a crime, but as a victory. Songs were written. Whispers of revolution spread. To many, the Gaspee was not just a ship, it was a symbol and its destruction a prophecy. More than 2 years before the Boston Tea Party and nearly 3 before Lexington and Concord, the Gaspee Affair had drawn the battle lines of what would become the American Revolution. Perhaps most importantly, the Gaspee incident helped crystallize the emerging idea of unified colonial resistance. When news of the Royal Commission's threat to extradite colonists to Britain spread, outrage exploded across all the colonies. In response, figures like Samuel Adams and Thomas Jefferson called for the formation of committees of correspondence, networks that would allow colonial leaders to communicate and organize resistance across all the colonies. What had begun as a local affair, one ship, one night, became a catalyst for continental cooperation, one that would birth the American Revolution. In that sense, the flames in Rhode Island were far more than an act of local defiance. They lit the fuse of a larger fire. Decades later, the Gaspee would be remembered not simply as a customs ship, but as the first real casualty of America's break with Britain. A plaque now stands near the site of the incident, and Rhode Islanders celebrate Gaspee Days every June with a ceremonial burning of a ship, complete with cannon fire, reenactors, and parades. In truth, though, the real power of the story lies in the murkier details. The clandestine meeting at the tavern, the midnight boats, the moment of silence before the flames. It was an act not of desperation, but of principle. The colonists believed that liberty was not something to be negotiated, but something to be defended, even at risk of hanging. Tension between law and liberty, between order and justice, would define the revolution to come. Thanks for listening.